I know it's an industry, renewable energy, an industry of a lot of great speakers and people who talk about doing projects, but it's hard to see the ones who can really pull these things off and really do a good job at it. So this group, I know there's different company names. Bronzeoak Philippines seems to be the overall group, and San Carlos Solar Power is one of their key groups that built the largest solar project in Philippines. Won the Solar Power Project of the Year Asian Power Awards, if I get the names right. Also won the Green Company of the Year Award at Asia CEO Awards in the most. But I can tell you there were many, many submissions, and a lot going on that you might not know. They don't get the headlines that maybe they should, but a lot of really, really good stories. But this one really, really stood out. Not only solar, but also biomass and biofuel and so forth. So we're going to have a lot of interesting information about it. So he asked me not to give too much information. I know I'm talking a lot, but it's really an interesting thing. So I'll let Sech Zabaleta, the president of Bronzeoak Philippines and president of San Carlos Solar Energy, tell the story. And there's videos of the entertainment session. Come on up, Sech.
Good morning, everybody. Richard, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting us to speak here today, share some of our experiences with you. We thought to keep this really quite casual and make it more of a chat conversation. I will try and keep it shorter rather than longer to be able to really open it up and be able to have an overall conversation, and I want to make sure that we get the chance to let people ask questions and be able to talk about things that people are really interested in. So to start with, I think we just wanted to make this more of a show and tell, really talk about who we are and what we are and have been doing and will be doing. And then thereafter we can steer the conversation towards any particular area that people are interested in, whether it's on the technology side or whether it's on the policy side of the market or anything like that in particular. Anyway, to really get started, I guess I'd have to go back about a dozen years. Bronzeoak Philippines really is a niche player. We operate in a very small market and small industry. We're primarily developers, project developers. So our role is to identify opportunities for projects for greenfield projects, I should say, to be developed from concept stage and take it all the way through design, permitting, financing, construction, operation, and thereafter. Bronzeoak Philippines is a Filipino company started by a Filipino group, our own family company actually. We've been, I know I often hear that I don't necessarily look like it, but I'm Filipino born and bred. So I'm fourth generation Filipino. My great-grandparents were Spanish and came to the Philippines in the early 1900s, so about 100 years ago. We're actually from, more specifically from Negros. So not only Filipino, but actually a Negros-based company. And although we have our corporate offices here in Manila, you'll see that all our projects and the bulk of our operations and technical expertise revolves around Negros. And of course, that vast majority of you that are here that knows anything about Negros can only assume that, of course, we were involved in sugar. I can confirm we were. So that's how all of this started. So we've been involved in sugar for about 50 years now. And 20 years ago, during the administration of towards the end of the President Aquino's administration, started President Ramos' administration, after the local government code was passed to really boost rural development. As most of you know, smaller cities started to grow, and that's when we started doing what most farmers do when cities grow. They become land developers. So we started with land and then moved towards infrastructure and then moved towards water, and then in 2003 moved towards power, but very uniquely in power as an offshoot from the sugar sector. So it was really in introducing to the Philippines bagasse cogeneration and subsequently biofuel production from sugarcane that had been pioneered initially in the 80s in Hawaii and then expanded into Brazil, other parts of Latin America, and then in the 90s into Thailand and Australia. So it was really replicating what had been successful elsewhere into the country. And so we've been in business now about 12 years. Right on our start, we got our first initial foreign investment partner, which was a UK-based company, and thereafter have had partnerships and investments with over half a dozen different international investors and partners, and that continues to this day. So all of this is very much a reflection of a collaboration and partnership with a whole range of companies from many different parts of the world. We obviously have other Filipino partners, but also have investors from the UK, from Germany, from China, and from the US a few years ago as well. So quite diversified. We have 4 projects that we've completed development so far, and that pretty much crosses the range of sectors that we're involved in. I'll go through it more detail later on, but we started from agri, moved into biomass, which was really a convergence of the agriculture and power sector, and then from there moved into solar, and now looking at further opportunities in the power sector. So for those of you that aren't too familiar with specifically where I'm talking about, Negros is in the central part of the country, in the Visayas, just across from Cebu. And more specifically, we're based in San Carlos City, Negros, which is directly opposite Cebu Island. Some of you may be familiar with the western side of Cebu, where a lot of industrial growth and development is happening. There's one of the largest shipyards now in the world, Tsumishi shipbuilding facility on the western side of Cebu. We're directly across from that. So we're about 20 kilometers directly across the ocean. We can see each other across the water. So as I mentioned earlier, we're involved really in all aspects of taking the project from an idea and take it through to final operation. And that includes some of the things shown here: conceptualization, permitting, contracting, technical design, and then financing, and then construction and operation. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone may have on all these areas later on. As one can imagine, we work very closely with all sorts of colleagues in all these areas. We do a lot in-house, but we also work with a lot of external companies, whether it's specialist consultants or partner firms. Partner firms, sometimes it's in the way of service providers, sometimes it's in the way of equity partnership or EPC partnerships with companies that have some of these specific expertise. So from 2003, we basically spent the first 2 years assessing the market, identifying the right opportunities, doing a pilot project identification and proof of concept testing. In 2004, we put our first large project into full development towards the end of 2004. It took about 2 years to take the project through to all those stages and get to financial close. In early 2007, site work began, and funnily enough, on New Year's Eve, December 31, 2008, the plant began first run and first export of power onto the grid. The company's been running now for 5 full years, and has seen a very interesting time. Technically, operationally, has gone all quite well. We continue to be the largest producer and have been consistently. Everything we produce goes through Petron Corporation, a good partnership with Petron. This really was a partnership of a good broad range of sectors. The equity partners involved in the project when construction started included, aside from ourselves, a key Filipino investment group, a US-based investment group, and also a group of local sugarcane farmers and planters in Negros. So it kind of brought together people involved in the different sectors that allowed for the project to be quite successful. It opened at a very interesting time during the global financial crisis. It was a trying period during those first 2 years. As we all may recall, oil collapsed from $130 a barrel in 2007 to $30 a barrel in 2008. And all of a sudden working capital and all sorts of financing disappeared. Through resilience of everyone involved, got through that. It was interesting movements in the market, but since then everything's been going quite well and has recovered. Most of our first projects, and most of the ones that I'll be showing here today, actually is in our home and central focus area of San Carlos in Negros, here on the eastern side. The area marked in blue is the plant that you've seen, and basically all of this forms part of the San Carlos industrial zone, an area that has been long in development under PEZA coverage and approval. And all the solar sites are immediately to the north of this site. This map that you see, the photo, probably spans 2012 of the feed-in tariffs by the ERC. That allowed our biomass project to move forward. It allowed other developers to move forward with some hydro projects and some wind projects that had also been in development in a while. Some of which have now been completed as well. We saw anyway at the end of 2012, early 2013, that there weren't too many projects moving forward in the solar space. Part of that is because the allocation that had been initially set by the Department of Energy was not very large, and therefore there was a reason to it wasn't of too much interest to the very large local players, and certainly to the large international players. It was a 50 megawatt allocation it was target for solar power. We thought there was an opportunity for us to put small to mid-sized projects adjacent to our biomass sites. And that's basically how we started, as this being an expansion of our biomass sites to include a second source of revenue to existing sites. But soon thereafter, we immediately partnered with a company that knew more about the solar sector than we did, and immediately saw that these were able to move forward in their own right. Part of that is a development that happened actually in the market in 2000, from the middle of 2012 and up until maybe the middle of 2013, there were dramatic advancements in technology that dropped the cost significantly. In 2011 to early 2012, the price being sought by the Solar Alliance of the Philippines was in excess of 15 pesos per kilowatt hour. I think the view of most people, including our own, was that regardless of whether that was the true cost or not, it was going to be difficult for the market to really bear that kind of cost. And true enough, in the second half of 2012, when the ERC finalized the rates for solar power, they approved it at a much, much lower rate than that. And the criticism of the ERC at the time was that it was not going to get any investment. And if you look at conditions in early 2012, that would have been true. But I think in hindsight, people I think one could say that the ERC must have had inside industry information from someone somewhere in the world, because what they did actually was to predict that they saw or knew about this significant drop or big advancement in efficiency and yield, which resulted in a drop in cost on a per megawatt basis. You know, the advancements we've seen in that yield and technology don't happen every year. You know, we've seen it happen twice in the solar sector in the past 15 years or so. So I don't think anyone is expecting another significant improvement over the next few years. But it was well timed. It happened right when the targets were being put up, and it allowed our first project to move forward and others now to follow. That does make it viable to do these mid-sized projects at the rates that the DOE and the ERC have set for solar power. And it's a rate that makes a lot of sense. And you know, I get a lot of questions from people saying, well, you know, if you can do these big plants, does it make sense for me to put it on my rooftops? And the basic, simple answer to that is the cost today is such that if you're paying your utility anything more than 10 pesos per kilowatt hour, which if everyone here is living in Manila, you are. Well, actually, the gentleman here from Meralco know what they're charging. Then the cost of putting up the solar panels on your roof makes sense. Because any kilowatt that you can generate on your roof is 1 kilowatt less that you have to buy from Meralco, and therefore saves you a bit of money. This is not, I should say, a threat to Meralco's business. In fact, I think in the short term, the more people put up, I think that reduces Meralco's problem of trying to keep up with demand. Because of course, Meralco is the distributor. It's generation that's the constraint right now, as I think a lot of you have been seeing. And there's a lot of sense, and I think it's to the utility's benefit to have distributed generation in improving and stabilizing the distribution grid. So I'm sure they can tell you a lot more about this, but there have been a lot of advancements in the small and rooftop solar application space that includes net metering and net metering approvals that were done last year and so on. So I think there's an expectation that solar panel installation will grow on rooftops and commercial space installations. What we've seen in other countries is the utility is a key partner to this. The utility actually, many people start to put more capacity on their rooftops than can actually be absorbed by that building. And so the utility ends up becoming a buyer and actually starts to buy power from the people that have flat, sunny roofs, and then they sell it to the people who have steep or shaded roofs. So they become a solar power trader and distributor to the rest of the market. And so in, what was it, middle of 2000, sorry, let's go back here. Middle of 2013, we went into construction at our first site, and then in late 2013 at our second site. This is a time-lapse video of our second site. This took about, this was for 9 megawatts, and this took about 8 months to build. So these are photos taken, I believe it was 6 times a day, and basically put together over 6 months to show the progress. So the conditions at this site were such that they required actually concrete ballast foundations. You can see how they get laid down, and then the mounting systems get bolted onto that, and then the panels get screwed onto that. So really quite a simple and straightforward process, although I should say requiring a very specific skill set in terms of expertise to make sure that they're all aligned and operating at the optimal level. And so that was completed in the middle of 2014. This is a picture of the site taken maybe about 6 months ago. This shows the first two projects, so 13 plus 9 megawatts, total of 22. So that has been operating since the middle of last year. We were surprised and delighted that during our opening, President Aquino and Secretary Petilla there on the left came down to join us for the inauguration. I think it was a strong signal of support from the administration and really of supporting not only new technology, but really the expansion of infrastructure as a whole, and more specifically additional power capacity installation that's going to support our continued growth. I think obviously we're all been aware of the success that our country has had in the past few years in terms of growth. I think many will also agree that over the next few years, for us to be able to continue at that pace, one of the biggest threats is actually that we don't choke our own growth by lack of infrastructure. So I think the government is doing what it can. A lot of these PPP projects, I think, are intended for that in terms of roads and highways. And I think obviously the airport in Cebu is now underway, many other local airports. I think port expansion will come next. And power, of course, has now been totally privatized, and I think they're doing what they can to try and support any power development from continuing forward and keep up with growth. I'll come back to that a little bit later on. So more specifically, maybe to give a little bit more insight into the plant that's in operation. The plant that's in operation is 22 megawatts. It uses one inverter for every megawatt peak of installed capacity. So it has 22 inverters. To preempt some of the questions that I'm sure I'll be asked later on, our inverters happen to be SMA inverters from Germany. There are many inverter options out there that are very reliable. Inverter technology has made great advancements. In the past few years, ABB actually purchased one of the world's largest inverter manufacturers, and ABB is therefore now a big player, and obviously ABB has been in the country for a long time as well. The plant in San Carlos supplies the Western Visayas grid with peak power. It's, you know, I get asked how reliable it is. I can tell from experience now, it's really remarkable in terms of how reliable it is, and to the extent that the answer is it's about as reliable as the sun coming up every morning. Obviously, the amount of output varies, but not to the extent one would think. You know, I think there was this impression that I had 5 years ago that, you know, you needed a great big, warm, sunny day to have a lot of power. And on days that you didn't, you were not really producing anything. That's not really the case, and the variance on most days really isn't more than about 20%. So it's quite predictable in terms of you know, when it's going to start and what it will be able to put out there. This year, I think we've got a short video of what it looks like today. Actually, this is not today, because I'm actually looking at the back, and this is, so this was about 6 months ago, prior to the expansion work. I think this is towards the latter part of construction, just before our inauguration. I'll skip forward. So about 6 months ago, so this is the back part of the plant that's currently in construction. And about 6 months ago, we started an expansion to more than double this site to add another 23 megawatts. So as if you look at this video and look ahead a little bit, where these panels end, beyond that, it looks like there are rows of basically stakes in the ground. Those stakes are actually pile foundations that have put in that have the panel. So I'll let this one run for a little while, because it'll show you basically how this is done. So you take a site, you basically clear it, grade it for drainage and access, put the roads and drainage in, and then pile the foundations in. And so to the left here, those little lines you see is actually a steel pipe of about 10 feet long that gets inserted into the ground, and at the top of that, you bolt in a horizontal attachment to the foundation. And then as we move along here, you'll see how this progresses. So on top of these horizontal supports, they basically then bolt in the mounting systems, and you'll see that in a moment. The mounting system is the skeleton that then holds the panel itself. So here up ahead, just across the road, you'll see where they've finished installing the frames or the mounting systems that hold the panels. And then onto that, you basically then bolt on the panels. And further up on the screen, you'll see where some panels have already been installed. Now, what you're not seeing here is that underneath all of this, there were, of course, extensive works to lay down and bury cabling under all of this. So this is what it looks like after that, but earlier on, the whole thing looks like is an open site where the entire site has been dug up. So I think that gives a pretty good idea. So when completed, Sacasol 1, as we call it, actually comprised of 4 phases, will total 45 megawatts in San Carlos with 45 panels. And to give you the scale of that, it's over 70 hectares. So quite large, and I guess for those that are used to the American system, that's about 180 acres. And this uses the 45 megawatts are composed of 176,000 solar panels. So it's on the one hand looks quite simple, but it's quite a large scale operation. It has included nearly 1,000 containers delivered, so it's quite a large logistical exercise as well. And should all be completed, the full 45 megawatts completed by this May, so in just about 2 months' time. We get asked often why we're in solar. That's a very different question to why solar power has been advancing around the world. Why we're in solar is because it made sense for us. It was an ideal fit to the business we were in and the locations we were in and so on. So I think it's part of the growth of solar power around the world. There's been an incredible expansion over the past couple of years, and it's expected that will continue in the next several years because it makes sense actually for the grid in terms of it being distributed generation and reducing peak demand and typically peak demand during the day anyway gets provided by either diesel or peaking gas plants, which we don't have here in the country. Our gas plants here are all baseload, so it makes a lot of sense. Currently, the mix is, as you can see, insignificant from when you look at the percentage in terms of the total Philippine mix. And when I get asked whether it's true that we may run out of power and whether it's true that we need more power, I like to show them this slide. Over the past 20 years, Philippine consumption of electricity has nearly tripled. And that's at a time when we were not growing at 6 or 7% a year. We are pretty much at about, if you consider plant shutdowns and things like that, we're about right now consuming all the power we generate. We don't really have a lot of reserve capacity in the country. We don't have capacity that's sitting idle, allowing for more growth. I think the unexpected growth we've had in the past few years at that 6-7% which equates to a larger percentage growth in terms of electricity demand, has taken up most of the current capacity. The industry has responded quickly, and there are a lot of plants under construction, including baseload plants. There's a lot happening, obviously, in Mindanao, several under construction now in the Visayas, and others that are underway here in Luzon as well. But one thing I can assure you is that if our economic growth continues at anywhere close to what we've been seeing in the past few years, even if it slows down, we're still not building enough plants to meet continued growth and demand. Even with the advancements of energy efficiency and all these other things. And so there's obviously a big opportunity in the power sector, and I think it's why we've been seeing a lot of the large conglomerates move into that sector. And even then, it's still insufficient, and I think that's why all the current players and new players are coming and looking at expanding. Nearly every company you can identify really is working on expansion at the moment. In a much smaller way, we're doing the same. So we have, aside from the 20 megawatts of biomass we have under construction right now and the 45 that's being completed, we have 4 other solar projects in various stages. Our second one, a total of 32 megawatts, is actually already in construction. The next 3 are all at final or actually completed stages of development and going through final financing right now, and will all go into construction in the next few months. The same is true for biomass. The obvious focus right now is solar because of the ability to complete them by next summer. I think all of you know there's a desire to have significantly more capacity installed by next summer, which is when, let me correct a misimpression. A lot of people think that next summer is when the country will start to face blackouts. That's a very big misconception. The country is facing blackouts today. The country has been facing blackouts for several years. We're just not as aware of it because it hasn't hit Metro Manila yet. Well, these guys will know more, but I think there's some expectation it might hit Metro Manila in about 2 weeks when Malampaya goes down. That's short term though, but next year they're expecting that it could start to hit Metro Manila for a more extended period. And so there's a strong push to try and put in as much capacity by the middle of 2016 as possible. And then we'll be focusing later this year on getting our additional biomass capacity of baseload power of another 50 megawatts into construction. And then thereafter move into the wind sector as well. So that's pretty much who we are, what we're doing, and happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.